You know, over 15 million Americans work the graveyard shift. Have you ever actually been one of them? Have you ever found yourself completely alone in a massive building after hours? It's a weird feeling, right? The normal, comforting, ambient noise of the day just kind of fades away. The lights seem, a little too dim, and suddenly every single creak of the floorboards literally demands your full attention. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving deep into the extreme environmental and psychological isolation of the graveyard shift. We're going to break down 4 very specific accounts that show us exactly how the dead silence of the night can shift from peaceful to absolutely terrifying in a heartbeat.
So what actually happens when you are the only one awake in a sleeping city? It's a pretty fascinating question when you think about it. Look, during the day, we are surrounded by safety and numbers, but at night, workers in otherwise totally normal, mundane jobs become uniquely vulnerable. They become the solitary witnesses to things that are strange, unpredictable, and sometimes totally unexplainable. We are going to look at 4 ordinary nocturnal jobs: fast food, rideshare driving, security, and gym maintenance, and we're going to see exactly how they transformed into pure terror.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, the fast food stalker.
Okay, so our setup here is a young guy named Thomas. He works the drive-thru window at a local Burger King. Now, he actually prefers the night shift, but from 10 p.m. all the way to 4 a.m., he usually works completely solo because they are severely understaffed after midnight. So for the most part, it's just Thomas, his headset, and the occasional late-night customer looking for a snack.
But then this really bizarre pattern starts to emerge. Between 1 and 3 a.m., a car pulls up. A male voice orders a large double Whopper with cheese and a Coke. Pretty standard, right? But when the driver pulls up to the first window, he only rolls down his heavily tinted window just enough to slide his credit card through. He pays, Thomas hands in the receipt, and then the guy just drives off. He never stops at the second window to actually get his food. At first, Thomas just shrugged it off. Free meal, right? He happily ate it. But then it happened a second time, then a third. Soon, this mysterious benefactor was basically buying Thomas dinner every 4 or 5 days for weeks.
Then things take a very dark turn. One night at 2 a.m., that familiar voice comes through the speaker. But instead of just ordering, he says this: "I hope you've been enjoying those Whoppers, Mr. Hurley." Okay, the absolutely crucial point to remember here is that Thomas doesn't wear a name tag with his last name on it. It isn't posted anywhere in the store. There's absolutely zero reason this random driver should know his last name. Thomas completely freezes. He starts repeatedly asking who is there, but the engine just revs up and the car disappears into the night.
And this psychological manipulation, it quickly moves from his workplace right to his literal doorstep. Thomas gets home to find a handwritten note waiting for him, and it only escalates from there. The very next night at work, the man returns and hands Thomas an address on the outskirts of town, demanding a $10,000 drop-off within 2 days. Thomas, thinking it's got to be some kind of sick prank, and honestly not having that kind of cash, just ignores it. But 3 nights later, he is jolted awake by a rock shattering his home window. Now he's trapped. He can't afford to move, he can't afford to quit his job, and he has a stalker who knows exactly where he works and exactly where he sleeps.
Moving on to Section 2, the midnight detour.
Our source for this one is a recent college grad who drives for Uber and Uber Eats on weekends just to make ends meet. Normally, he sticks to the downtown bar crowd, but on this particular Saturday, a really high-paying fare takes him on a 40-minute drive way past the suburbs. By the time he actually drops his passenger off, it's 2 a.m. and he is out in the middle of absolutely nowhere.
So, about 10 minutes into his drive back to civilization, he spots a car stopped with its hazards flashing. There's a middle-aged couple frantically waving him down. Against his better judgment, you know how it is, he stops and rolls his window down just a tiny crack. The frantic woman claims the bridge up ahead is completely collapsed and they almost drove right into the river. Her husband helpfully points out a narrow dirt turnoff that cuts deep through the woods, saying it's a bypass. But the driver's gut is screaming at him that something is deeply, deeply wrong. He decides to ignore their advice, continues straight ahead, and what do you know? The bridge is perfectly intact. It wasn't collapsed, it wasn't even damaged.
The terrifying reality of what might have been waiting for him in those woods is revealed a few days later. Driven by pure curiosity, he drives back out there in broad daylight. The couple, of course, they're long gone. But right at the entrance to that narrow dirt path in the trees, a brand new sign has been nailed up to a tree. It simply reads, "Dead End." The driver actually steps out of his car to look down the path, and suddenly a horrifying, piercing woman's scream rings out from deep within the dense woods. He scrambles into his car and speeds away, realizing just how incredibly close he came to a carefully orchestrated ambush.
Next up is Section 3, the invisible intruder.
For this one, we are looking at a 26-year-old security guard working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift in the dead of winter. Now, he is literally the only employee on site at this massive commercial warehouse complex. His whole job is basically doing perimeter walks and monitoring the camera feeds from his office.
Things get weird at 1:30 a.m. A motion alert triggers on the loading dock camera. Then it happens again and again, always right at the absolute edge of the frame, like something is intentionally staying just out of view. By 3 a.m., he goes outside with his flashlight to check it out. But here's the thing, the snow is completely unbroken. There are absolutely no footprints out there except his own. Then, right at 3:20 a.m., he hears this loud, heavy metallic scraping sound coming from deep inside the warehouse. Suddenly, camera 6 goes to pure static for 3 seconds. When the feed finally returns, the camera angle has been physically shifted a few degrees to the left.
At this point, he has no choice. He grabs his flashlight and goes in. We're talking 80,000 square feet of towering industrial shelving, all cast in this dim, yellowish half-light to save on the power bill. As he walks down the main aisle, he starts hearing footsteps 2 or 3 aisles over. But when he stops walking, the footsteps stop. When he verbally announces himself, he is met with total, suffocating silence. He finishes his entire patrol and finds absolutely no one. And as he notes, that is arguably so much worse, because now he has to sit there and finish his shift with 100% certainty that someone is hiding in the dark with him, watching his every single move.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Barefoot Sprinter.
This account takes place at a 24-hour keycard access gym. The attendant is a young worker on a gap year between high school and college, grinding through an exhausting 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift. Around 2 a.m., the gym is mostly completely empty, save for a few regulars and one guy the attendant has never seen before who's just running on a treadmill in the far corner.
Now, what immediately catches the attendant's eye on the digital monitoring system is this specific number, 9 miles per hour. That is an incredibly fast sprint. But what makes it so alarming is that 10 minutes go by, then 15 minutes, and the man never slows down. Not even a little bit.
So, the attendant checks the security camera and is met with a deeply, deeply unsettling sight. The man is wearing ragged clothes, his mouth is hanging wide open, and his face is just frozen, staring straight ahead. But the absolute horror really sets in when the attendant steps out of the office to confront him. He realizes the man is running completely barefoot. At 9 miles per hour, his feet are literally tearing apart on the belt. The treadmill is covered in blood, splattering everywhere with every single violent footfall.
Terrified but knowing he has to intervene, the attendant yells over the loud thudding of the man's bloody feet. He yells for him to stop, but the man doesn't turn his head. He doesn't pant. He just responds in this cold, raspy voice, "Are you there?" And then he repeats it, "Are you there?" The attendant immediately retreats back to the locked office to call the cops. He glances at the monitor one last time, and the man is now staring directly into the security camera lens, mouth open, still sprinting at full speed.
And then, the climax of the whole nightmare. The man suddenly leaps off the treadmill and vanishes from the main cameras. Seconds later, he appears on the employee hallway feed, standing just 6 feet from the office door. The attendant locks the deadbolt just as the doorknob begins to violently rattle. For 3 agonizing minutes, while dispatch says police are still 5 minutes out, the man unleashes a terrifying, deep, inhuman scream, violently shaking the door, trying to force his way in. And then, just total silence. By the time the police finally arrive and search the entire building, the man is completely gone, leaving literally nothing but a trail of blood behind.
Finally, Section 5, the terrors of night work.
When we take a step back and synthesize all of these sources, a very clear structural pattern emerges here. The extreme environmental isolation of the graveyard shift completely changes the rules of engagement, right? Whether it's a stalker leaving threatening notes, a coordinated ambush on a pitch-black road, an unseen intruder playing psychological games in a warehouse, or an unhinged individual violently breaking down in a gym, the core vulnerability is exactly the same. It's the heavy psychological burden of being the absolute only witness. In these early morning hours, incredibly mundane jobs transform instantly into inescapable nightmares, purely because the safety net of society is fast asleep.
Which leaves us with one final, lingering thought to take away from this explainer. The next time you find yourself alone late at night, whether that's in an empty parking lot or a quiet office or driving down a deserted road, ask yourself,
Who is watching you when the rest of the world is asleep? Thanks so much for joining me to unpack these sources today. Stay curious, and please stay safe out there.